Tonight, on Your Real World, Megaupload.com gets shut down by the FBI, charging its creators with criminal copyright infringement and money laundering on a massive scale.
Relating to breach of copyright offences in the United States, money laundering, and
Google publicly defends its new privacy policy, but the EU regulators question whether the proposals sufficiently protect users' personal data. Then later, the Vatican calls for a world central bank, and the UN wants a world tax to help the poor. Good evening. Why is it that some major news stories never seem to make it into the mainstream media? I mean, do we really need to hear about another bear sighting, or how some idiot kids got lost in the ski hills and had to be rescued? I mean, who the hell cares? How does reporting these type of news stories, if I can even call them that, impact your life in any way? Why aren't we hearing about the stories that really matter to the people of the world? Because there's a lot of stuff going on in the world these days, and you really need to be aware of it. Take, for example, our first story tonight. Despite the recent US anti-piracy law being recalled, the Department of Justice and the FBI still managed to conduct a sting operation that, on one of the world's largest internet sharing sites, effectively shutting down the mega giant Megaupload.com and all of its affiliates. Busted. Possibly the biggest anti-piracy bust of all time took place on January 20th, 2012, when a global sting operation led by the FBI and the Department of Justice brought down the file-sharing giant Megaupload and arrested its founder, the 38-year-old German hacker and playboy Kim.com. .com, who was denied bail, is in an Auckland, New Zealand prison, facing as much as 20 years if he's found guilty. Megaupload's U.S. attorney Ira Rothkin insists that the company was a content storage site similar to Dropbox, and .com had no knowledge of any of its users' piracy activities. In a statement, .com's attorney said, "This is basically a showing of copyright extremism by the government in taking down an entire site in an overbroad manner without giving Megaupload an opportunity to be heard in court."
within New Zealand, we have seized in excess of $6 million worth of top-end motor vehicles and over $10 million in cash from several New Zealand finance companies.
The Megaupload indictment came at a time when piracy was very much in the news. A day earlier, a pair of anti-piracy bills, the House's Stop Online Piracy Act and the Senate's Protect Intellectual Property Act, were killed after a massive campaign backed by web giants including Google, Facebook, and Wikipedia. In the wake of the campaign, which involved millions of Americans writing to their representatives and symbolic blackouts of major sites including Wikipedia, Senator Patrick Leahy, a Democrat from Vermont, and Representative Lamar Smith, a Republican from Texas, abruptly withdrew their bills. The U.S. investigation into Megaupload, which took 2 years in partnership with law enforcement agencies in New Zealand, Hong Kong, Germany, and elsewhere, allegedly uncovered incriminating emails, a PayPal account that received more than $110 million from subscribers, and international bank account transfers totaling millions of dollars. Google has come under fire from the US Congress after introducing its new privacy policy recently. I mean, here is an internet giant who has been accepted worldwide as a safe and secure way of finding information on the internet. But what if Google started collecting personal information about you? Would you be comfortable with that? Would you be comfortable with how they used your personal information? Here's Catherine Herridge from Fox News with more on that.
This issue is gaining traction on Capitol Hill with a closed-door meeting Thursday between members of Congress and Google executives about its controversial plan to cross-reference data generated by consumers who use Google's online services. Analysts say Google has upwards of 50 platforms on the web from which they can gather information about you. By aggregating or pulling together the information, consumers can expect to see ads that are tailored to them. For example, if you're in the market for a new car, based on your searches, the ads on Google will reflect that.
If Google knows that I'm searching for a hybrid vehicle and it's going to serve up now ads for hybrid vehicles or for vehicles that are like that. Why would it serve up an ad for, say, a big gas guzzling full-size pickup when in fact I'm not in the market for that?
And of course, there are drawbacks as well. Some lawmakers say by gathering the information, Google is building a profile about you, and some of that information, including the results of medical searches on the web, may be sensitive.
With the internet, you can tailor it much more clearly and precisely. And so, you know, it has its upside. The downside is that a lot of the consumers don't know what's being collected and when it's collected, and I think they should know.
In this 12-page letter that was sent to 8 lawmakers on the Hill this week, Google said that the data is secure, the data is not being sold, and that there are privacy tools online to opt out. But lawmakers make the point that most consumers don't know how to opt out of all of these options and to use their computers to do so. And bottom line, that all of this information is being gathered that essentially builds a profile about them.
Google has also come under fire from EU regulators, who called on Google to halt the introduction of its new privacy policy, saying that it needed to investigate whether the proposals sufficiently protected users' data, users' personal data, that is. The European Commissioner in charge of data protection, Viviane Reding, welcomed the move, saying that it was necessary to establish that EU data rules were being firmly applied. The move by EU regulators comes days after the European Commission set out legislative plans to overhaul its 17-year-old data protection rules, putting in place much more stringent policies on the protection of individuals' data. Under the new rules, internet companies such as Google, Facebook, and Yahoo would have to ask users whether they can store and sell their data to other businesses, such as advertisers, which is the source of almost all their income. And finally tonight, David Icke has been talking about it for years.
The creation of a one-world government to which nation-states would be principalities, administrative units, a world central bank which would administer all financial transactions on the planet, a world currency which wouldn't be coins and notes, it would be merely electronic, cashless society for which there are fundamental implications for freedom, as we'll see as we go along tonight.
And now the announcement from the Vatican, who recently called for a world central bank and a global public authority to rule over financial institutions that have become outdated and often ineffective in dealing fairly with crisis. Really? That's your justification for wanting to take over the world? A report published by CNBC News in October 2011 stated that the Vatican was calling for the establishment of a global public authority and a central world bank to rule over financial institutions that have become outdated and often ineffective in dealing fairly with crisis. The 18-page document entitled Towards Reforming the International Financial and Monetary Systems in the Context of a Global Public Authority was at times very specific, calling for, amongst other things, taxation measures on financial transactions. This opinion was also shared by the United Nations in February of 2012, when they stated that they wanted a world tax imposed on all financial transactions to fund a global model of social services that will provide needy people with the basic income, free healthcare, education, and housing. This represents the UN's latest attempt to fleece Western taxpayers under the utopian rhetoric of global socialism. While invoking the plight of the world's poor as a justification to create a slush fund under its control, the UN is also invoking the discredited pseudoscience of man-made global warming in an effort to shake down the developed world through the imposition of carbon taxes. But let's get back to the Vatican. It's also called for the establishment of a supranatural authority with worldwide scope and universal jurisdiction to guide economic policies and decisions. Interestingly enough, the Vatican felt that such an authority should start with the United Nations as its reference point, but later become independent and be endowed with the power to see to it that developed countries were not allowed to wield excessive power over the weaker countries. It said the International Monetary Fund no longer had the power or ability to stabilize world finance by regulating overall money supply, and it was no longer able to watch over the amount of credit risk taken on by the system. The world needed a minimum shared body of rules to manage the global financial market, and some form of global monetary management. Are you seeing the connection here? The Vatican and the UN working together towards a global initiative? Are you all okay with this? In my next report, I'm going to be talking about something that's buzzing on the internet right now, but you won't hear a whisper of it on the mainstream media. It's talk of a North American union between Canada, the US, and Mexico, which consequently would lead to a North American currency. Yes, you heard it. One step closer to that one world currency that David Icke keeps talking about, and possibly the one world government that they're pushing towards as well. So now that you know a little bit more about what's going on in the world, do you really want to tune into the mainstream media to see another bear sighting or find out what the stars were wearing at the Golden Globes? There's a lot of very interesting stuff going on in the world out there, and I'm going to try and bring it to you whenever I can. But do yourself a favor. Do your own research. Draw your own conclusions. But above all, open your eyes and your mind to what's actually happening in your real world. Good night.